Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Tuesday, August 18th, Washington County Board of Commissioners work session. This is Chair Catherine Harrington, and I'm joined in our conference room auditorium with Commissioner Jerry Willey, Vice Chair Commissioner Dick Scouten, and Commissioner Pam Treese. The first item on our agenda is board and leadership communication. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first, thank you. The only thing of real note that I wanted to at least give you some preliminary heads up, and I'll provide the board with more information later, some notes and some other thoughts and materials. I did attend the Council for Forest Trustland Counties meeting on Friday. We had an opportunity towards the end, after a list of speakers, to share with everyone else our board's continuing policy position with respect to the balanced use of the forest in Tillamook State Forest in Washington County. We had a couple of other speakers as well. We had Commissioner Sullivan from Clatsop County, and she talked about the need for balance in our speaker program because it was weighed very heavily towards timber and to timber. So we both expressed some concerns that there'd be a more balance, more opportunity to explore all the dimensions. Also talk more about climate change and the role that the forest could play there. And I must say that Chair Yamamoto was certainly very courteous to all of us, and he ran a good meeting. And I'm glad that we finally met after 6 months. So more later, I have some information and some additional stuff that came by way of PDFs that I can share with the rest of the board.
Great. So if it helps for more of us to have presence, particularly in regard to the hopeful adoption of the Habitat Conservation Plan, let us know.
Yeah, but we'll see how that all plays out. Yeah. It's always more of a challenge to have good communication when you've got litigation in the background as well.
Yeah.
And we did hear from Mr. DiLorenzo, who provided his thoughts about the interface between the Lynn County class action lawsuit and the Habitat Conservation Plan work that's going on with the Board of Forestry, or the Department of Forestry.
Yep. Great.
Okay, more later.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anything else?
I'd just like to report that I attended, along with the chair and Commissioner Scouten, the listening session last night. It was amazing to see as many people participating, and I thought the format went smoothly. I did express my frustration at only being able to listen, which is, I understand what the focus of the process is, but I think all of us, when you're in these positions, want to jump in, and it's hard to hold yourself back. But it was really well done, and I appreciate the work that the staff did to make it an effective process. So thank you to everybody that was involved. It was very well done. I also attended the PAB meeting last week, so that those processes within the CDBG realm are moving forward.
What is the focus of the PAB now?
And I knew you were going to ask.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I need to refer back to my notes, but it was right now we're getting ready for the upcoming series of applications and that
for the
process.
next grant cycle.
Yes. And it's also, one interesting feature of the PAB is that since we have representation of such a wide variety throughout Washington County, the meeting ends, and then we spend about, as you well know, about a half an hour with updates from the various communities.
Yeah, it's kind of good.
And it's very good. It really does give me information about what's going on in Banks and Gaston and, Tualatin. that you don't necessarily hear on a regular basis. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that work, and I appreciate the work that Jenny puts in continually to make the meetings run smoothly.
And well, go ahead.
Oh, speaking of last night's program, I thought that Marcus Mundy did a good job. He actually had a fairly big load playing as a master of ceremonies, I would describe
Yeah.
his position, and I thought he did a very graceful and very, very adept job.
And Elizabeth did a great job of continuing to provide resources in the chat without changing the dynamics of the listening session. So thank you.
It all went so smoothly, really. I think everyone felt they were in the flow, and hopefully the breakout rooms, for the other 2 breakout rooms went well too.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
great, yeah.
I will say, it's hard to hear, you know, you need to, as Marcus said, you know, be comfortable with your discomfort, or work to be comfortable with your discomfort. But it is hard to hear the frustration, the anger, the pain that we're hearing. But that's our job. So I appreciate that.
Great. With PEB, is the committee involved with grant reviews for the emergency funding, or is staff doing that, given the
CARES
consolidated plan?
Yes, staff is doing that. And that follows the same process that we've been following with all the CARES money. So
Yeah.
it's well done.
Great, great, terrific, thank you. Commissioner Willie?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to WEA for their breakfast with the 3 superintendents. Last week it was, they were all talking about the issues, of course, that I think you were on that as well. I thought you were just talking about the complexities and the issues that they're dealing with, not only with trying to find childcare for their teachers and for their staff, and all the myriad of complexities they've gone through it. But it was interesting that I think it was the superintendent from Tigard-Tualatin that said, what we used to have a week to decide, we now have 24 hours. And it's, especially as we get closer to the opening of school, I think those challenges are going to become maybe less than 24 hours that they have to make these adjustments. So, yeah, it was very informative, and so I thought it was very timely. Good job. I did miss the listening session last night. I was scheduled to be on it, but obviously I could not be. But I will look forward to, we're taking notes of that, I understand, and we'll get a report back at some point in time. And I will, Thursday is the Latino listening one, and I will be queuing in on that one as well. And then lastly is, as you know, last week, our PPE arrived, and all individually packaged, children's masks as well as adult masks, a variety of colors. These are all at the BRCs. If you want, they are very well done. I was hoping Diane was going to be here so I could give her a shout out on how well they are put together. They're very nice. So they're not the cheapies. Yeah, I'll do that. Matter of fact, I'll give each one of you your very own to look at or something. This is one for you, Roy, because it's the children's one.
I need a children's one so I can make kid ones.
There, you can have those. But yeah, anyway, nice job. And you let Diane know that, Mark? Okay.
Great, I'm all set, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah.
I'll give you pretty things.
Jerry, do you know how much, excuse me, Commissioner Willie, do you know how much these cost?
I do not. I have not seen an invoice on these yet. Diane probably knows right off the top of her head, but But yeah, they were very inexpensive, I'll put them that way, so good price.
The instructions are difficult to read.
Yes, you have to read another language. I would guess Chinese.
So for those in our viewing audience, this was an effort through the local economy effort or principle for the CARES Act funding through the county to help ensure that businesses and families, workers, all have the opportunity of protective face coverings.
Right,
which-
it's
Who
all
would have
free.
thought it's so well timed, given that the state requirement now is face coverings in all business environments as well, not
Right.
just public-facing ones.
Well, and I had a chance to visit the inventory at the Hillsborough Chamber, which is our local BRC, and they are ready. They opened up yesterday, so I'm interested to see how much activity they actually have. We have an access for, and again, I give Diane and her group all the credit for this. We have 145,000 face masks that are available. We have some KN95s. Hand sanitizers, we have just the whole gamut of things that we all need now on it for a daily life, and they're all available for free at the BRCs. So certainly want to encourage businesses to utilize that free service.
Yeah. Part of people helping people.
Yeah, and it's good for business too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Commissioner Rogers, welcome.
Couple of three things. One, I would also say thank you, Mark and Diane. You did a great job, and I know you filled the void. It was a little bit of work to go to our Chinese producers and get a supply, but it was important. Comey, thank you so much for the tour of the Fields property last week. We had a nice tour of the new units. The developer, Comey and I walked through and saw what was transpiring. They're going to be opening up two of the buildings pretty soon. So it was an interesting tour. It's not too far from my office there in Tigard. So it's a great project. Yesterday at WCCC, not a big event because it was primarily the I-205 tolling project, which that was my third or fourth time I've seen it. So they were, in fact, all the mayors had seen it more than once too. So it was a condensed version of that. There is no JPAC meeting this Thursday. They've taken this particular month off. So, and I also plan on being there on Thursday. I had a pre-commitment last night. So if you're listening. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you. Well, as for me, some highlights that you might be interested in of our public health team, and I followed up on our July meeting with the school superintendents. They meet on a regular basis, but we had asked them back in the July meeting, how might we be able to help? So our public health team is certainly very active in reviewing all the reopening plans that the school districts need to submit. And last week, the state issued updated guidance documents for schools, but also on Friday, updated guidance from the Early Learning Division for childcare as well. And so childcare is what we really focused on in this follow-up meeting yesterday. As just like we're an employer, there are other employers, especially large employers. We have 2,000 employees here, but other employers who know that some of their workers are reliant upon childcare, and now that the academic year will be starting off in comprehensive distance learning, folks are having trouble because it's not clear yet what hours their children will be in the comprehensive distance learning and engaged there, and other times when they'll still need supervision, but they're not actively with the teacher on screen. So the there are employees of all the teachers and staff in the school district that need additional childcare. And as we've been chatting about for a few weeks now, this is a cost for families on the order of $260 to $300 a week that they didn't have to pay before because with in-school learning, there were set hours where that was taken care of. So many, just like with Clean Water Services, are engaging with licensed providers. At this point, there are a couple of resources for families. If you call 211, you can get hooked up with a list of licensed providers. We have 517 licensed providers that are approved for the emergency protocols that are in place given this public health crisis. And don't be confused by that word emergency. Several weeks ago, I heard emergency and thought that meant that childcare was only available for essential workers, but they're not one and the same. It's just a word being used with regard to the protocols that have to be in place during this public health crisis. So I needed to get my head around how large of a problem do we have, not only for school district employees and our own employees, but the community at large. And so I did some analysis on my whiteboard, and if we were to take some of the contingency dollars from the CARES Act, it could go anywhere from like $1 million to help with their setup costs should the school districts have space, all the way up to about $255 million to offset the cost for childcare for about 50,000 of our 86,000 school-age children. I tried to scope out for kindergarten through 12 years old how many might that be. So that's quite a range, 1 million to 255 million. But it did help me to scope out those numbers, and we'll continue to engage. We've got a great staff working with our own early learning folks here to continue to problem solve with the school district so that by early to mid-September, when the academic year launches, because there's a variety of starting dates, that will go relatively smoothly. So it's a big problem.
I have a question in regard to that. So what I think I heard you say was you were thinking about I think we have 7 million in our contingency fund.
Yep.
And the consideration of not adding to the 4 million in childcare, but looking at what level of support could we potentially give to the school districts for childcare.
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I
Yeah.
understand that
Yeah.
correctly. Thank you.
The 4 million for the from that we set aside in the framework, staff has put together a proposal. It's supposed to be launching either this week or next week. I've gotten 2 different answers on that. That will help provide for utility and the additional costs for existing licensed home-based childcare to the tune of about 100 and it's either 38 or 83. I might have transposed those numbers. That $4 million will go towards. And so if you look at that program page, they had provided, they already have the list of who's licensed, but they've started to get the word out. And whenever they launch it this week or next week, there's going to be a 2-week application period. So.
And those are primarily home-based childcare services.
Yep. And I'm as anxious as everyone else to get the simple write-up on that and have that sent to the board members.
Your discussion now of childcare reminds me of some good news after giving some bad news last week about the lottery funding or lack thereof. $2.5 million actually has been found towards that YMCA childcare center.
Oh,
That wasn't
good.
the full 5 million, but last week I had reported, which was the news I understood then, that there was no money available, but actually $2.5 million is going to be available, and there will be further efforts in the next legislative session to round up the last bit, and then to find additional funding from the city of Beaverton and from private sources. But I just wanted you to know that the good, bad news is that there's $2.5 million available, yeah.
Good. Every little bit helps. So as our team continues to do some scoping and problem solving, we'll bring whatever potential options there might be here to the commission over the next couple weeks. So, but time is of the essence because we've got the academic school year breathing down our necks. So that was it on the school district engagement. Last week was the kickoff meeting for the new transit committee meeting here in Washington County. You might recall this is focusing on the funding programs for the last mile all throughout the county. So we had a good first meeting there to ground everyone and give background. So we've got a series of meetings being set up for the next few months in order to accomplish the necessary work. And that's about it. So, all righty, leadership communication. Mr. Rhodes.
I just have one item on the update on the CEIO hiring. The individual has accepted the position, but we are awaiting her to do her required notifications of her current employment before we publicly announce. I think she will start work on the 9th of September, so a little earlier than we anticipated, but very good.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Mr. Rapplier.
Nothing here.
Okay. Mr. Jockers.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I am sitting in for Diane today. She's following the first tenet of COVID, which is if you don't feel well, stay at home. So she is doing that today. Two things I wanted to point you to. One is a Privy Council that we distributed today. Last week, Community Action in partnership with cities and service districts launched it's the first comprehensive water, sewer, and stormwater utility assistance program that's been available here in the county. And it is driven for those folks that are impacted by COVID. This is CARES Act funding that we were able to secure through Washington County. It's about $3 million. We launched that program with a campaign last Friday with Community Action and all the cities. Huge kudos to City of Hillsborough and City of Beaverton and Sherwood, and everybody pitched in together to really put together a program, Tualatin Valley Water District, to get this out there. Community Action is accepting applications right now for people who would like to apply for this funding. The funding is available to cover all water, sewer, and stormwater costs that have been incurred since March 1st. If these folks have been impacted by COVID, which means job loss, reduced hours, illness, quarantine, pieces like that. I want to give my thanks personally to Jack Lang and also to Jenny Proctor, who were really instrumental in teaching me about this and getting this program in place. So we're thrilled about that. The other thing is on Thursday, we will be doing the agricultural worker distribution of cloth face coverings at the Tualatin River Farm over on Minter Bridge Road in partnership with the county and with Soil and Water Conservation District, the Farm Services Agency, NRCS, and the Extension Service. So we've been doing some pretty assertive promotion of that recently.
I neglected to follow up with you and Diane on this. I had, fed it out through media channels and contacts. And I got some feedback back about the hours of the distribution and a question about could the tail end be extended out because several farm workers don't get off until 4 p.m. or so. And so making it by that 5 p.m. deadline might be a little hard.
That's good. I will provide that advice to Bruce Roll, who's running that program. It is from noon to 5, but certainly if someone's in line there or they're arriving right at 5, we're not going to shut down. We're going to be there as long as people show up. So
Great. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And I have been asked, given that the supplemental unemployment insurance, the $600 has come to an end, there is concern that that might raise the number of people who are having trouble making their rent payments. And so I asked Mr. Rhodes about it, and we'll have staff come and help us understand. Hopefully, as we've worked with Community Action to push those dollars out, hopefully they'll be staffed up. I imagine they're going to have a big ramp up of demand there. So, great, great. Well, now we can move on to the next item on our agenda with Mr. Stephen Roberts on House Bill 2001 and the middle housing rulemaking. If I might pause. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. I neglected to see if folks had any questions on the agenda for our meeting at 10, our business meeting. I just wanted to highlight that there are a few changes to the agenda that we've seen pushed out since it was previously published. Under boards and commissions, item C has added the matrix of committee members. And then on the consent agenda, under land use and transportation, item H, the award memo link was added. Then item R, under health and human services, was an added item. This is for the RFP for the grant infrastructure contract with MISO for the Child Care Assistance Program, the $4 million we were talking about earlier. And then item S is another RFP waiver, and this is for the workforce training and development aspect of that. Are there any questions on the agenda? No, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. Yes, welcome, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So this morning, we wanted to give you an update on the status of the rulemaking around House Bill 2001, the middle housing bill. We've briefed you before on this, and we're in the thick of the rulemaking process right now. Teresa Cherniak, our principal planner for community planning, is ably representing the county and other local jurisdictions on the rulemaking advisory committee that is continuing to meet. And we updated our final PowerPoint a little bit late yesterday afternoon, so I don't know that it made it into your packet, but this has been a moving target, and so what we have for you is the latest as we know it right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Teresa, but real quickly before I did that, I just wanted to let you know that I think there's been some concern among a number of jurisdictions around the state, and the League of Oregon Cities has weighed in on their behalf with some concerns about some of the implementation strategies that maybe the Department of Land Conservation was pushing to require all middle housing types on every lot in every jurisdiction. And so there's been some concern around that. So Teresa can give us a little bit more info, but it sounds like staff at DLCD have been pretty responsive, and they understand some of the concerns there, and so they're working on some alternatives to try to help mitigate a few of those concerns. But obviously, the fundamental concern is ensuring that any rulemaking doesn't undermine, obviously, the original intent of the legislation, which is really to get more middle housing on the ground in all parts of our communities. And so I think with that, I'll go ahead and turn over to Teresa to give us the presentation. I want to note we also have Andy Back, our Planning and Development Services Manager, is online, and Kim Armstrong, who's been working with Teresa very closely on this. So go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much. And just confirming that you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. Teresa Cherniak, Principal Planner for Community Planning. It has been a while since we briefed the board on House Bill 2001, the middle housing bill. It looks like we were last year in January. So a lot has changed since then, and we wanted to bring you up to date now. So this first slide shows that actually today is the last rulemaking advisory committee meeting prior to the recommended rules, which will come out September 1st. Those will be filed by DLCD at that time. There then will be a Land Conservation and Development Commission hearing, their first hearing on the large cities and metro counties are considered in with the large cities. That first hearing will be at their September 24th, 25th LCDC meeting. There actually will be another joint RAC and technical advisory committee meeting in October after that first meeting or that first hearing. So if things come up there that are different from what we've heard so far, or if there's more work to be done, that can be done with the RAC and the TAC in October. And then at this point, they're scheduled to have their final hearing and adoption November 12th and 13th. I'll note that actually the bill requires adoption by the end of the year. So there could be the opportunity, again, if there's a lot of controversy, there could be a further hearing later in December. And then June 30th of 2022, so not next year, but the year after, is when the county would need to have implementing regulations in place. Next slide. So just an overview as a reminder of what's in House Bill 2001. The intent was to reduce barriers to middle housing, and I'll define middle housing in a second. But the intent was to encourage a more diverse mix of housing types, so different sizes and configurations, built in neighborhoods that now maybe might only allow single-family detached houses. So the bill and a companion bill, House Bill 2003, made some sweeping changes regarding housing. Some have said it's the end of single-family housing, and it's actually not that. Single-family housing is still allowed, but it's the end of maybe exclusive single-family zoning throughout the state. So the idea is to provide housing options for people who may not be able to afford that detached single-family home, and it also will allow property owners an opportunity to redevelop their properties. The idea is that hopefully it will impact housing affordability by increasing the number of units, providing smaller units, and providing that extra income maybe from rentals. Next slide. So middle housing is defined in the bill as including those range of housing types between single family houses and say multifamily or apartment buildings. Often these are found in older neighborhoods. So they include duplexes, townhouses, which could be any number of units, but attached all together. Triplexes, which would be 3 units together, quadplex, 4 units together. Cottage clusters, which would be smaller units around typically a courtyard. And then the bill doesn't actually call accessory dwelling units middle housing, but for other intents and purposes, it does serve that same kind of purpose. Next slide. So the provisions of the House Bill 2001 had requirements for medium cities that were a little different and a little less than what it requires for large cities. And so it includes large cities outside of metro, and then all the counties and cities within metro that were over, I believe, 1,000 population. So there are 2 parts for us larger jurisdictions. One was that we needed to allow a duplex on each lot or parcel, where we currently allow detached single-family dwellings, which for the county is almost all of the residential districts that we have, except the very highest density. And then to allow all middle housing types in areas, And you'll notice that each lot or parcel for duplex is in italics, and then in areas is italicized for the other middle housing types. So the bill didn't quite define what these terms exactly meant, and a big part of what the rulemaking has been discussing is what exactly was meant by these terms and how do we operationalize that. Next slide. So the provisions of the bill say that the local jurisdictions may continue to allow detached single-family units, so those aren't disallowed. We just have to allow the full range of types of housing. It does allow us to regulate the siting and design of middle housing. So that can include things like the setbacks and height and maybe floor area ratio or bulk of the housing. And it does allow us to consider allowing middle housing in other locations beyond just what is required in the bill. But what it says we must not do is, through any of these regulations, discourage the development of middle housing through unreasonable costs or delay. And again, a big part of what's been talked about in rulemaking is what constitutes unreasonable cost or delay. Next slide. So in the rulemaking, there are two parts to what's being considered. One is development of a model code. So that typically they've talked about in terms of probably for smaller jurisdictions that might not have the resources to do more of the work, that they could apply these standards directly. And these are being adopted into the administrative rules of the state by reference. What probably most large jurisdictions and what we expect the county to do would be to meet the minimum compliance standards that are established. So these are minimum standards that development codes will have to meet in order to comply, and the state will be reviewing then each jurisdiction's proposed regulations to see if they do meet the minimum compliance standards, and those will be adopted directly into the rules. Next slide. So a few overall points, and then I'll get into some of the details. So every jurisdiction has to allow, and this includes the medium cities as well, at least a duplex, so 2 dwelling units on all lots. And then the standards require that, or sorry, they would not require the county or anyone else to allow more than 4 dwelling units on a parcel without a land division. And I think there has been concern off and on about maybe this redevelopment happening very quickly. And we just want to make sure that everyone understands the pace of that housing redevelopment will ultimately be determined by individual property owners and developers and the market. And so it probably won't be a really fast kind of thing happening, but we expect probably will happen more slowly. Next slide. So on duplexes, this has actually already been approved by LCDC for the medium cities, because this was all that they were required to do. And the regulations for the large cities is modeled on the regulations for medium cities. So we expect this to stay the same. So I mentioned that a duplex will need to be allowed on every residential lot or parcel that would allow a detached dwelling. So density standards will not apply in this case. Any lot would be able to have a duplex on it. It would be subject to the same standards as a detached home, so setbacks and height and that sort of thing. One of the things that the state has looked at is that parking is considered to be one of those things that does add quite a bit of cost to housing development. It's also something that people do use. So looking at what's the right balance for the maximum that can be required. And so for duplexes, the determination was that one parking space per unit off-street parking is the maximum that can be required. Next slide. For the other middle housing types, so that would be the quadplexes, triplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses. They must be allowed in residential areas that allow detached housing. And this has been, as I mentioned, the big discussion over the past several months. What exactly did the legislature intend by saying areas versus on every lot? So DLCD started with what they called a whittle away approach, was that it would need to be, these types would need to be allowed in all areas except for these areas listed here. So goal protected land, that I think primarily is intended for goal 5, the natural resources protections, but there are other goal protected areas such as natural hazard areas. And then areas that have infrastructure constraints, lands with steep slopes over 25%. And then they have carved out an exception for new master planned areas. This would include areas like, say, Bonnie Slope or North Bethany. Right now, the definition is actually areas over 20 acres. But a lot of this, also the new UGB areas that will have particular requirements that need to be met. So those were carved out from this requirement. Next slide. And the idea also with this, the other middle housing types, is that the same approval process needs to be applied for the middle housing as to detached dwellings in the same district. So for the most part, for the county, that's a type 1, which is more a ministerial review. So it would be less process than currently for these types. And things like lot width and setbacks and heights can't be more restrictive than the detached dwellings, but we can apply clear and objective siting and design standards. These again can't be more restrictive than for detached dwellings, but in some cases, say with what, as an example, Portland has just recently adopted clear and objective siting and design standards that look at bulk and mass of buildings and floor area ratio. So those kinds of things could be applied, but we would also need to apply that to single family detached homes. And generally, the local density maximums wouldn't apply, but there are other standards that essentially get at density and would quite increase the density that would be allowed. So next slide. The current draft standards, so in addition to that whittle away approach of where the housing would be allowed, the other part of the where is on which lots. And right now, the current draft standards would allow at a minimum that triplexes could be on all lots that are 5,000 square feet or larger, that quadplexes, so 4 units on lots 7,000 square feet or larger, townhouses allowed at 4 times the maximum existing density or 25 units, and then cottage clusters limited by other requirements. So essentially where this would end up is that the density would, for all of these, be somewhere around 25 units per acre.
If I could interject at this point, I'm not sure if it's been said already, but where this slide says applied to the county, in our role it's applied to the urban unincorporated areas. And I think that needs to be
Absolutely.
noted with every single one of these statements. Yes,
Absolutely. Yes.
yes, the requirements from the state apply to cities as well, but with regard to our work, what we're talking about are the urban unincorporated area neighborhoods within the metro urban growth boundary.
Absolutely. That's an
Places like
excellent.
Aloha, Bethany, Metzger,
Garden Home, Raleigh Hills.
Cedar Hills.
Cedar Mill. Mhm.
Right. Absolutely. That's an excellent, excellent clarification.
Yeah.
Well, it's also in District 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So this change here was somewhat of a late addition. So we're just starting our analysis on this. We've started to look at the size of lots that we have across the urban unincorporated area, and in which land use districts, and also in which communities, and do we have a distribution of these? So we've just started this analysis, and this is something that we would plan to bring back to the board as part of our eventual implementation, is how this might work. The other part of this is there's this, and then the state has responded to jurisdictions' requests for flexibility with an alternative approach, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we'll probably need to analyze both of those approaches and then bring that back to the board to talk about which way the board might want to go. So next slide. The other part of this is that, again, because the state is seeing parking as being one of those expensive parts of providing housing, they are looking to provide a maximum for the number of off-street parking spaces that jurisdictions can require. A developer can always provide more, but this is a maximum that we could require. So the minimum would be 1 off-street space per development, maximum 1 space per unit. And in general, this is lower than what the county currently does require. We can also allow credit for on-street parking, and we can allow a garage or carport, but we can't require that. Next slide. So as Stephen mentioned, and I mentioned just a second ago, some cities were concerned with the draft rules regarding the areas, and how initially DLCD was quite restrictive in how they were trying to apply that. And the cities, including the League of Cities, was really pushing for more flexibility in the requirements. And there have been a couple meetings with the League of Oregon Cities that the county has also participated in, most recently last week with DLCD staff. And DLCD was very responsive, I think, to the concerns being raised. And so just Friday, they came out with an alternative minimum compliance standard. That it's more like performance measures for how you would need to what you would need to show you're accomplishing in order to be able to do something other than what's provided in here. And just we did have some concerns about this, that we wanted to ensure that community character, neighborhood compatibility, and similar concerns couldn't be used to justify the alternative minimum compliance standards. So there need to be other more clear reasons why that you might use an alternative minimum.
With respect to that last bullet point, that kind of language would not be particularly clear or objective. I assume that would be one of the
That's correct.
problems that it would run afoul of.
Yeah, and they're being the state is being quite good, I think, about establishing clear and objective criteria And also establishing equity considerations that need to be addressed so that jurisdictions will need to won't be able to concentrate middle housing in certain areas and not in others. So it'll need to be kind of spread around, and they're looking at equity also in terms of characteristics of different neighborhoods and making sure that again it's not concentrated in certain areas. So the DLCD is establishing what they're calling a performance approach that has these thresholds, and they just came out with it on Friday. They have said it's just a concept or an outline at this point. So I expect that there'll be a lot of discussion today at the rulemaking committee about it, and we'll probably hear more, and they will hear more about maybe the parameters and how to flesh that out a little bit more. And I expect by the time they do the filing of their draft rules by the end of the month, they'll have that fleshed out more than they do now. So if I could go to the next slide. This is just a quick slide to show the unincorporated land that's designated to allow single-family detached residential. It does include almost all of the residential land designations that we have. So these are the geographic areas that will be affected by the changes that we'll eventually need to make to the Community Development Code to address the House bill. And again, I noted we haven't been able to do the analysis yet since the rulemaking is still being developed, but we will, and we'll bring that back to the board. So there'll be a lot more discussion about this, but just to get a sense of the scope of the area we're talking about.
And I would just like to add for folks who may be listening to this from our general public. So for those gray areas that have residential areas, those are handled by the cities. So it's not just that these rules will only apply to the yellow areas, but these are the areas by which we, Washington County, have jurisdictional authority.
Absolutely. Again, thank you. Great clarification. The gray areas do indicate incorporated city areas. Darker gray and the lighter gray are areas still in the county, but outside of the urban growth boundary and in the rural area. And then most of the white is actually some other land use designation. So it might be commercial or industrial or community business district or some other non-residential district. Next slide. So the next steps, we are having the board briefing today, and would like to talk with you about whether you would like to take a position prior to the LCDC meeting. We do have a technical assistance grant for economic feasibility research and analysis. So looking at specifically at our various communities and where might it be likely for us to see more redevelopment to middle housing, and kind of analyze that, and also look at our infrastructure in those areas, and all of that will be intended to inform the future decisions that we make. And then we'll be planning board and planning commission briefings this winter as we start on the work. Next slide. So the questions for the board today is whether you have concerns about the direction of the rulemaking at this point, if there's anything missing that you feel should be in the rulemaking or that you feel we should be thinking about in that. And then just talk about how the board would like to be involved moving forward. We could definitely come back once the draft rules have been filed and prior to the LCDC first hearing, and talk at that point about whether the board would like to take a position or not, or have testimony provided at the LCDC hearing. So I think I'll stop there and open it up for board discussion.
Commissioners, any questions or comments?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to understand more precisely what kind of flexibility are we talking about? What is it that the cities would like to see? What kind of flexibility?
I think the cities were wanting to see their ability to consider other things that they're already doing within their jurisdiction to try to encourage middle housing. I think what the point they kept saying was that the legislation didn't require to allow it in all lots, and the direction the state was going was to require the middle housing on all lots. So they wanted it to be more left to local jurisdictions to determine where within their jurisdiction the middle housing should or could be provided. It looks like the direction the state is going is still based on lot sizes, but allowing cities to consider more local conditions. So I'm not sure if Kim is able to speak. She may have more of a sense of what the cities have been asking for.
I think it can boil down to the cities don't like being required to do something along this line as a gross generalization.
Yeah, it's always going to be a subtext, and I get that. I mean, I'm as proud a burger as anyone as far as trying to maintain local control, but I do have a couple of experiences. One is that, and I'll just try to be brief here on my soapbox, but I lived in a duplex for 23 years, and the property value tripled over that time period. So it's a nice little duplex development. It has done well and has maintained its property values, and the neighborhood is still in very good repair from the time that I moved to the time I left, which was a total of about 23 years. This is just due west of Murray and Allen, and just due west of where I had lived was a 600-unit development that had been built in the late 70s and early 80s, the Four Seasons development. And Four Seasons is really a very nice development, good residential neighborhood, but it has a mixture of duplexes, quadplexes, townhomes, as well as single-family homes within a 600-unit development. And it's really a very, very nice place. So this can be positive, and then we need more housing. And my final comment is my years before planning commissions and city councils in the Bay Area in particular showed to me what the consequences was of years of people saying no to development, even as they were rapidly developing and growing their high-tech industry. And consequences have been very painful. And we've got to make this thing work better. I mean, I shouldn't have to stick my mouth right into this thing, but I guess apparently I do. I find it very annoying. So we don't want to be like the Bay Area either. So those are my thoughts, and I'll get off my soapbox.
Other commissioners, we just have a couple minutes.
Yeah, a couple questions. I remember when this was first passed, and it seemed to me, I live in an HOA, and so we reviewed our HOA requirements, and it specifically excludes anything but single-family housing. Obviously, this legislation would supersede that, I'm assuming, but I was told by an attorney that if we put additional language in it that we could prevent that in our neighborhood, and I can't imagine anyone in our HOA doing that, primarily because there's no space there, but is that true? I mean, do HOAs have some sort of ability to, by their charter, supersede this legislation?
My recollection from the legislation was that it said that you could not impose new HOA requirements. So they would not be, in the future, you wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think that was the whole point, that we had to have it done by December 31, 19, in order for it to come into effect. We did not do that because we didn't think it impacted us, but it was an interesting conversation to see how HOAs could actually supersede this legislation. But realizing, thank you, Alan, that they had to do that within a certain time frame. So, go ahead.
I do want to mention just how we would handle it is, so we have, as you know, HOAs are civil things, between private property owners. So there could be HOA restrictions that could, disallow these, but we would still process them and get them approved. And then it would be a civil suit, within the HOA if they wanted to bring it up with a particular property owner. So it does create more circumstances like that. That happens now where things are allowed under county code that an HOA may preclude, but we still say, well, it's allowed under the county code, and it's up to the HOA and those processes to stop it if the HOA wants to stop it. So we would anticipate we would have more of those circumstances in the future.
Mr. Back is absolutely correct, and there has been a Court of Appeals case out of Washington County where we permitted something that the HOA rules did not allow, and the Court of Appeals upheld the HOA private contract between the property owners.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I'd have to go back and revisit ours. I don't think our verbiage complied with it, but we, like I said, we weren't concerned. I was just wondering generally with HOAs. And then quickly, the second one was the pushback on all the cities that I was hearing prior to the approval of this legislation was that their utility structure, water pipes, sewer pipes, all of that stuff were not designed for multifamily. They were designed for single family. So how does this the rulemaking apply when a homeowner wants to put a duplex or a fourplex maybe on their back lot? Do they have to pay for all the upgrades to the utility system to make it work?
I think that would be our understanding, is that there would need to be availability of service from the utilities demonstrated. And then there are some provisions in the legislation that allow for what are called infrastructure-based time extension requests. Our assessment in working with our local utilities, especially CWS, Tualatin Valley Water, was that there weren't anticipated to be significant issues in capacity with the systems that are in place today. There may be some very isolated areas where perhaps the sewer hasn't been extended yet, or there may be a very small system that may need to be upgraded a little bit in order to accommodate additional capacity, but those should be very isolated. And it isn't uncommon that developers have to make certain improvements to infrastructure in order to accommodate the impact of the development.
Okay, thank you.
I
have two quick ones too. And in fact, there were the two that he had, so this will be really quick. One, let's clarify on a pre-existing HOA language, because a lot of it does preclude anything other than single family. So, Alan, your comment had to do with new, not necessarily pre-existing. So that's it. And to Jerry's point also, it's the exact thing that I heard. Take a look at what the unreasonable cost would be. That's where it centers. So if somebody came in and they had 2 or 3 lots, they had older homes and they wanted to take them out and put in triplexes, would it be an unreasonable cost for the government to say you're going to upsize quite a bit those lines? And that's where the issue is right there.
But Mr. Roberts was right to point out that we've covered this topic before, particularly with an analysis that Clean Water Services helped lead, and the concern about upsizing requirements is not as founded as people have assumed.
have a quick question for Mr. Roberts. the information, this PowerPoint is not currently posted. How will people be able to access this presentation? Actually, it's for Kevin, I guess, yes.
It will be posted momentarily. I'll Steph take care of that.
Great, thank you very much.
Whenever we have presentations or handouts that are not already in the packet, our board clerk follows up and makes them available.
I just had a request come through, that's why I asked.
Thank you.
So to finish up, I think that from everything I've seen from both staff at the Department of Land Conservation and Development, DLCD, as well as the commission, they are working towards rulemaking that demonstrates or supports the intent of the legislation that the state legislature passed. As Teresa noted earlier, essentially that legislation is targeted towards expanding housing choices. This does not require that developers pursue this, but rather this does say that jurisdictions such as ours for the urban unincorporated areas have to allow these additional housing choices. As I have seen parking highlighted, you can have parking problems in exclusive single-family detached neighborhoods. I know that from my own experience in a few different neighborhoods over 30 years of living here. I don't see any reason why we need to be overly restrictive on this. I don't see a need, with regard to your questions, for us to join others in further restrictions or moving towards alternative support. I think we should just be travelers. Thank you. We should just be travelers on this journey. And once the rules are adopted, then as you've noted, we'll have to incorporate the work necessary into the work plan in order to satisfy the requirement to implement accordingly by June of 2022. And certainly, if commissioners need other information, they can ask you for briefings to get more familiar with the information.
So the question of this presentation was, should the county support efforts of the League of Oregon Cities and several jurisdictions to promote flexibility within established parameters for local implementation of House Bill 2001 middle housing provisions? And you're advocating that we do not join that support?
Yep.
And I would say I think we should join that support. I think we need to support the League of Oregon Cities and our other municipalities. And I don't see them going some radical direction to try and circumvent the intent of House Bill 2001, and I think we should support them.
Well, I would take a wait-and-see attitude, I think, so I guess I'm more with the chair on this one.
I'd like to get more information. I don't know right now.
Where I would be is I think we've always had a great partnership with our cities, and so if they need additional time, that's not a problem. I think they're going to come to the same conclusions as we all have anyways. Yeah.
But the conversation hasn't occurred with the cities, is that correct, or it has?
It has. League of Oregon Cities really has been coordinating the efforts with DLCD. And again, I think there's been a lot of responsiveness and commitment on both sides to try to have a good conversation. And everybody wants to achieve the objectives articulated in the legislation. And I think the issue really just boils down to providing some degree of flexibility with specific implementation measures within each jurisdiction. So my sense, I guess, maybe to the chair's point, is that, we are along for the journey one way or the other, whether we explicitly take a position in support of additional flexibility or not. There are advocates out there that are pressing for that. And so I think there, certainly it seems like there are concepts in the works that address that desire, but still would require demonstration of meeting the clear and objective intent of the legislation.
Thank you.
And we may have a better sense after today of where the cities and the League of Oregon Cities are in terms of the recent changes that DLCD has proposed. I think that those do go quite far toward meeting what those jurisdictions were asking for, that flexibility. I've talked a little bit with the Beaverton representative, the staff person, and he was feeling quite good about how far DLCD had come in those terms. So there may not be still more of a push for more flexibility. They may feel comfortable with what's being proposed now.
Okay, so please just let us know if you'd like more. It sounds like you would maybe like a briefing, so we'll get that scheduled.
Thank you.
And if anyone else is interested, we'll do that. And I think based on what I heard today, we'll continue to keep you updated as the process moves along. We'll be available to help provide additional information if you need it. And we're always happy to come back with another briefing if that's desired as well. So just let us know.
Yeah, I would like to know what the clear and objective manifestations of flexibility, what that really means.
Okay. Yeah, and so I think we'll know more, and we'll keep you updated as the process evolves.
So just for clarification as well, the support aspect of it to the League of Oregon Cities is not an immediate thing that we have to do. I mean, I'm hearing you're going to provide more information, but basically the course that we're taking at this point in time is we're just going to wait and see.
Yeah, and my sense is I think the LOC has clearly articulated their concerns and other city jurisdictions as well. And so it seems that the desired response, I think, has been forthcoming already from DLCD. So I think the point being maybe that when we set this up a few weeks ago, we anticipated this would be a pretty relevant question. Based on progress that's already been made between DLCD and LOC, it seems less urgent right now, whether the board wants to take a specific position or not.
Okay. Would you please then keep us up to speed on if that changes?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. If there is a loggerhead type situation where we do need to weigh in on this, I'd like you to make us aware of that.
Got it. Will do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So I don't have the slide with your questions in front of me any longer. Have we addressed your various questions?
I think we're good.
Okay, great.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one more topic, but we're also going to want to have a short break before our business meeting. So come on up, Marnie. Marnie Kyle, our Director of Health and Human Services, for a short COVID update.
Good morning, Chair Harrington and Board. So I was off last week, so I actually don't have a prepared presentation for you for the work session. During the board meeting, I will go through a lovely presentation that thankfully staff prepared while I was gone. So thank you, Tricia and Eva in particular. But I'll go through the numbers, some updates on school guidance, some updates from the governor on face covering guidance and childcare. But what I did want to ask you at work session was, to be honest, where things are kind of running along relatively smoothly. There's not a lot of big changes or shifts. And so I wanted to ask you if you would like me to just do the board presentations and not necessarily work sessions unless there's something pertinent to bring to you. So it would be one less presentation if that's acceptable. I was going to only bring even work or board presentations when there was something really important or change or big, but Philip convinced me that the public is still interested in the short updates that we do at the board meeting. So if you're comfortable with that, then I would just do that.
The question that I want to make sure is posed to the commissioners is, have these work session briefings it seems to me that in the past, they have afforded you the opportunity to pose questions and highlight that you've had certain interactions where you're wondering how things are going. So if we take it off of the work session agenda, then that, your only replacement, you have two. Do it during the business meeting or add it to your email follow-up. So it's really up to you. I agree with Marnie that the degree of change is low. We're hoping to continue the downward trends of the spread so that we can get back to applying for phase 2. Also, we've had progress over the last couple of weeks, so my concern that we were working our way towards the watch list we've backed away from that. So really, academic school year opening, trying to get to phase 2, and dealing with the childcare needs really are some of the biggest things.
Well, and I completely agree with you, Marnie. I've been wondering this for a while we have one work session and almost a duplicate in the board meeting. So let's cut your workload in half by just going with the board meetings. And I think we all feel very comfortable about asking our questions in whatever venue we're in. So I'm perfectly fine with that.
Okay, and I certainly don't mind coming to both, and if something changes, then I'll make sure that I get on the agenda, so thank you.
And I would like to add, Marnie, if you can come during our leadership roundtable, if there's a burning question, we could ask during that time. Sure. Does that work with you, Chair?
Mr. Rhodes? I don't manage staff, so.
Yes.
The Commissioner Treese was asking that you have your staff member, Marnie, join us each work session during the leadership communication. So if commissioners do have questions with regard to the state of affairs on COVID, that they could do it there.
Yes, that'd be possible to do.
Okay, I will see you at 10 in a few
Can I
minutes.
say one thing to you, Marnie, before you, just
Sure.
for the viewing public, blasting all over news, as you know, the incident of somebody here in Washington County who said that they were tested, and they were tested positive only to find out that they weren't, and very unhappy. And so this isn't an exact science ever. I mean, you try. So can you just address, not now, but can you do that in the public so that?
Sure, that came up last week, and according to our public health officials at the state and local level, there is no such thing as a false positive. And if somebody tests positive and then later tests negative, we consider them a case.
You'll say that during the open session?
Yes, I can.
Are you going to have anything to say about the flare-up that occurred
Yes,
at the assisted living
Murray
or
Hill,
Memory
yes.
Center near Murray and Farmington Road?
Yes. I can quickly, there was an outbreak at an assisted living center on Murray Road, and there were 20 cases, both residents and staff, and there was no evacuation. However, some of the patients that were there were moved to a state COVID health center so that they could receive services. And I believe some were also hospitalized. Did you have you look like you had other questions. Hard to read faces through the mask, but your eyes.
You keep answering questions, you've given a report, you know. So.
Sorry. Okay.
Are there any other items that we want to make sure that Marnie covers during the update? The one that I'm interested in, and it doesn't fall under public health, but I want to make sure that as we know the unemployment, the supplemental unemployment insurance payments have stopped. I'm assuming that that will call for an increase of folks who are unable to make their rent payments. And I just want to make sure that as we have provided funding to Community Action, and then Community Action has received funding from other sources as well to help folks with rent payments, that two things. One is that folks know to contact Community Action, and the second, that they're staffed up to deal with a potential spike in requests. So that's that from me. Great. Well, we'll look forward to the presentation in our next meeting then.
Thank you.
Great. So we'll pause the work session at this point and reconvene. Looks like we do have quite an agenda today for our business meeting, so we will reconvene after lunch at 1 o'clock with our already scheduled agenda. So thank you.